Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. Back today to talk about The Gingerbread Bakery by Laurie Gilmore. This is the fifth book in her Dream Harbour series, a romance book series all centred around a small cosy town, which is basically very Stars Hollow from Gilmore Girls coded. It's a charming, quaint community where everybody knows everyone is kind and lovely, and everyone is a business owner of a shop with a very quaint, cosy name. Previous books in this series are The Pumpkin Spice Cafe, The Cinnamon Bun Bookstore, The Christmas Tree Farm, and the previous book in this series was The Strawberry Patch Pancake House, and now we have The Gingerbread Bakery. And in this book we are finally focusing on the romance between Annie and Mac, two characters who we have seen bickering in the background of previous books, and they are finally now getting their chance to shine. As I say, one of our main characters is Annie Andrews, who is the owner of a bakery, and her romantic interest is Macaulay or Mac Sullivan, who is the owner of a bar down the street. And these two, we know from the previous books, have a very antagonistic relationship. They are constantly bickering with each other. It's always been clear in the previous books that there is definitely some sort of attraction there, that whatever story we're going to get from them is going to be some sort of enemies to lovers scenario, but we don't know why. We don't know their history, and that's what this book is providing us. And everything is kicked off in this plot as a result of the wedding of Jeannie and Logan, who were the couple from the first book, The Pumpkin Spice Cafe. And this is meaning that Annie and Mac, as members of the wedding party, are having to spend a lot more time with each other, much to Annie's chagrin. Annie is very type A and perfectionist. She wants everything to go swimmingly, and so as a result of this, alongside running her bakery, is taking on a lot of responsibilities for the wedding. However, she's definitely taking on more than she can chew. Mac in turn sees how much she is doing and offers to help, and she, as you can imagine, is quite resistant to this because of said antagonistic relationship. But her having to spend more time in forced proximity with Mac is making her have to confront their past. And this book is a bit different to others in the series, as we alternate backwards and forwards in the timeline. Obviously there is the present day timeline where they're getting ready for Jeannie and Logan's wedding, but we're also flashing back 10-11 years to when Annie and Logan are around about 19 years of age. They'd gone to the same school but had never interacted, Annie being like the type A perfectionist student and Mac being the quintessential jock. However, they meet at a Christmas market, and being able to get to know each other outside of a school context where they had preconceived notions of each other, they really start to warm to each other and there's a real attraction there. However, we know that something must have gone wrong 11 years ago. Something must have gone down between these two, and through the narrative we're trying to work out what that was. In the present day, as Annie and Mac are working together to get through all of these different errands, which includes a runaway grandmother, Annie is becoming more appreciative of Mac. It's clear that Annie's love language is acts of service, and here is Mac constantly wanting to do whatever he can to help her, and it's meaning she's having to confront her feelings that she has kept repressed for so long. But because of their shared past that ended negatively, Annie's just finding herself going backwards and forwards and not being sure that Mac's intentions are really true. But of course, because this is a romance, you know what is ultimately going to happen. There is a nice safe predictability in the fact that they are eventually going to get together. You just have to go along on the sugary sweet journey to find out just how they managed to resolve everything. And yeah, I got exactly what I wanted from this. The Dream Harbour series is really interesting because I know that I definitely read better romance, and yet every single time that one of these books comes out, I immediately snap it up and I just gobble it up within a couple of sittings. I don't know what it is about this series that is quite so Moorish. I'm not particularly a big fan of small town cozy romances. That's not really a trope that I ever like, and this series is so infused with tropes that it does get quite meta about it. There is even a romance book club within this town who will often be noting different tropes of the town's romances as they go through the series. I think there is something in the fact that this series is so predictable and easy. Everything is very low stakes. Everybody in the town is pretty much a kind person. You never are worried that anything is going to go disastrously wrong. The most tension that you ever really feel is between the love interests and that question of will they, won't they? And I think a downside of that ease and lack of tension is probably the fact that none of the issues are ever delved into in quite the kind of detail that you might like. For example, the whole question of Annie and her perfectionist people-pleasing tendencies and the emotional mental strain that takes on her is never really heavily touched upon. And the reason I'm noticing this so much is that I'm currently reading Uncharmed by Lucy Jane Wood, which is similarly quite a light-hearted book, and funnily enough is also about a protagonist called Annie who is a perfectionist baker. Don't know what's going on there, but I'm quite enjoying it. But I feel like that does delve a lot more into like the trials and tribulations of being this kind of person, of always putting other people ahead of yourself, and that's definitely something I want to talk about in my review of that book. This never quite gets into it. It's kind of like, oh yeah, it's a shame that Annie never makes time for herself, but then we quickly skirt over it. You know, the answer all along is getting a man at the end who's going to help relieve some of that burden, and so we don't have to question it ever again. Another slight issue that I have with this book is that I do really feel like this book requires the previous timeline of 11 years ago in order to make this romance truly work. In order to make this romance believable between the two, we definitely need to see how they interacted with each other in years past, because otherwise, if you were just going through the present day timeline, as the rest of the books in this series have done, Annie is really giving nothing for most of the book and is otherwise just actively hostile to the point where you're like, should you two be together? It's only because you have that previous timeline that any of this really works. But at the end of the day, I am thinking to myself, am I reaching for this series because I know it's the most well-crafted, perfectly done romance that goes very deep into all of its conflicts? No, probably not. I think the reason I go for this series is because it is kind of popcornish. I know that nutritionally it's not the deepest thing that I'm ever going to read. I know that there are issues with it, and yet I still come back for more. I also just quite enjoyed this because it is kind of lightly festive. I'm a Christmas girl at heart, but I was okay reading this in September because everything is all done with just the lightest hand. Nothing about the Christmas narrative is overworked. So it's one that you could read at any time around autumn and winter, and you wouldn't feel hit over the head with Christmas, Christmas. Not that I have any issues with that, but I just think it's good to know. So there we go, those are my little thoughts on The Gingerbread Bakery by Laurie Gilmore. Definitely a book that made me feel cozy and warm and festive, even if I was reading it in September. Do let me know if you've read this book or any others in the Dream Harbour series. I would love to know what your favourite book is. I think for my money, I'm going to probably put my favourite as The Cinnamon Bun Bookstore, but this was definitely delightful in its own way. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.